Hey guys, this is Blue Forest. I hope you're doing well. So today we are doing a special edition of the anti-tier list where I'm going to give you my list of recommended bots for beginners or for mid-level players who are looking to improve in the game. So people who aren't super experienced yet, who are looking for bots that are easy to use, that have simple play styles, that don't require a lot of skill, as well as bots that can do perfectly well either unawakened or at low sig. Okay, now I should say that this is obviously a subjective list. There are other bots that you could put on this list, but these are the 2 to 3 bots from each class that I think will most greatly benefit you if you are a newer player or if you're at that stage where you're trying to improve and you're looking for some protection. So, a lot of these bots have things like tankiness, they have armor, they have shielding, they have healing, they have a lot of built-in damage, things like that. So let's go ahead and jump in, and we are going to start with MV1. So MV1 is one of the most well-liked bots in the game by both new players and experienced players. He's just very solid, he's reliable, he's got a simple playstyle and a simple kit. He's not complicated, he's not difficult to use, he does really good damage, he has very strong specials. That special 1 does more damage the more health you've lost. The special 2 is great, the special 3 is still pretty good. He bleeds consistently, he can also heal when he is bleeding. That does take some getting used to and some practice, but he does have some particular built-in healing. And in terms of his sig, he's actually fine without it. I would recommend awakening him, but at low sig, he does just fine because with his signature, there's 2 components to it. There's that great armor buff that he gets where he gets 90% armor when he drops to 20% health, and then he also gets 3 melee buffs for 7 seconds. For most players, particularly less experienced players, the armor is the more important part, and the good thing is that armor is the same whether he's at Sig 1 or 100. It's only the melee buffs that get stronger, and so you don't have to worry about investing in his Sig if you're a newer player because that armor will be there even at very low Sig. And so MV1 is a very good rhythmical bot. It's easy to get into a rhythm with him. He's great for general use. You can use him in all different game modes. And so for that reason, I definitely think he's one of the best bots for newer and less experienced players to use. So that brings us to Grimlock. So Grimlock is one of the few sort of all-purpose purifiers in the game. He's quite easy to use, much easier than a bot like TC, who requires a lot more time and patience to get really good with. The thing about Grim is he has a lot of things that are helpful to newer players, right? He has this great heavy, he has the unstoppable on it, he shrugs off damage when he's in that Dinobot form. He's got pretty reliable specials. He burns in a special 1 and 3. The special 2 hits like a truck. And of course, he purifies. Now, you do need him to be awakened. That, is what allows him to purify. But again, you don't have to worry about getting his Sig up because the purification is also exactly the same at Sig 1 or 100. The only thing that gets better are the melee buffs that he gets when he takes DOT. But that's not something you have to worry about if you're just getting used to the game and you're trying to improve. His purification is passive. You don't have to do anything. That makes it very easy to use. And he purifies almost everything. So he doesn't purify dazed or backfires, but he will purify things like bleed and shock. And certainly, if you're not too experienced, you're definitely going to be getting hit sometimes. You are going to take some of that DOT damage. And Grimlock just makes it a lot easier, of course, as well as getting those melee buffs when he does take that type of DOT damage. So Grimlock also has nice reach advantage with that sword of his. There are issues with him air punching sometimes when he's up close to the opponent, but overall, in terms of purifying bots, he's the easiest to use. A lot of people like to use him, and he will do very well in all different game modes against DOT bots in general. So let's look at the warriors. First, we're going to take a look at Scorp. So Scorp has a lot of both offense and defense built into him, which is great. So he has his Dazed ability, which is unique to him, and this allows him to apply Dazed very easily with the special 1 and 3, and this significantly reduces the chance that ranged hits will hit you, and it also guarantees that ranged specials will miss you completely if the opponent is under the effect of Dazed. Scorp also has a lot of offense with his backfires. Now, backfires can take some getting used to, especially in longer fights, but again, if you're a newer player, you don't have to worry about that. His backfires are fantastic because they are passive damage, right? So you are gaining a Venom charge every time you gain a bar of power, and then you can apply those backfires with the heavy or the special 2, and not only do they deal a lot of damage when the opponent uses a special, but if you have a few stacks of backfire, even if the opponent doesn't use a special, they can still be stunned or have a lot of shock applied to them, and the backfires add up. Even 1 or 2 stacks of backfire can deal real damage, and he gets a nice attack boost for every Venom charge that he has, and of course, Scorp heals. So he does need to be awakened for that, but again, he does not need to be high sig because the healing is pretty decent, even at very low sig, because his sig does not scale significantly. So, every sig level, the healing rises by a very small amount. So even at sig 5 or sig 10, he's going to repair a decent amount of the damage taken from non-special attacks. And since you're getting those Venom charges very easily, passively, every time he gains a bar of power, having that healing makes him very, very useful for players of all experience levels. And for that reason, I highly recommend him in the Warrior class if you're looking for a bot that will give you some protection as well as some really nice offensive ability. And so that brings us to Dirge. Dirge, I have played with a fair amount. I think he's a great bot for less experienced players, and that's largely because of Fear. I mean, Fear is a fantastic ability. It's unique to him because it results in passive damage with those great bleeds, but it also has those buffs and debuffs. It increases his crit rate. It reduces the attack of the opponents. He also has this interesting sort of anti-evade where the opponents are penalized under the effects of Fear when they do things like sidestep and backstep. So there's a lot of things that are built into Fear that you don't even really have to do anything for. A lot of it is passive. Now, of course, you can have Fear removed if you're getting hit and so forth. But once you become a decent player, the opponent will often not be able to remove Fear. And there's the fact that Fear is always on the opponent at the start of the fight. It cannot be purified, and he has great specials also that have bonuses with Fear. He's getting extra attack, he's getting stronger burns, and of course on his special 3, he has that very long 30-second Fear which cannot be removed. So Dirge, his playstyle is a little weird at first, kind of like Ramjets. It's a little bit jerky because he's kind of floating in the air, but once you get used to it, he's very easy to use. He's got really good DOT, he's got good attacks, lots of bleeds, he can burn, and of course, Fear is absolutely fantastic, and he does not need to be awakened. I mean, his sig is good, it's nice, he gets an attack boost when the opponent, misses attacks, but it's not necessary for him to activate Fear and to activate all of the other abilities that he has. So whether he's unawakened or he's at low sig, Dirge is going to do just fine for you. So I certainly do recommend him. So that brings us to the tacticians. So first up, we have OGP. OGP, one of the most widely used bots in the game by all skill levels in terms of players. He is one of the best bots in terms of base damage. He doesn't need synergies. He doesn't need any of that. He hits very, very hard. He's got some of the best armor breaks in the game. All of his specials are good. All of them. In his special 3 applies that permanent armor break. He has a great heavy where he gets that attack boost when he rolls out. And he's just really fun to play with, and he's also very rhythmical and easy. You don't have to think too much. He's not complicated. He does lots and lots of damage. He also has that fantastic synergy with Ratchet, who's on this list. So if you're using Ratchet, OGP is then able to heal, and OGP does not need to be awakened. He has a nice sig. It's helpful. His sig allows him to land bleeds when the opponent is armor broken, but it's not necessary. So if you don't have an awakened OGP, he's still going to do very, very well. And once you do awaken him, if he's at low sig, he's still going to land, pretty good bleeds whenever you armor break the opponent, which you will do very often. So OGP is just another great bot, kind of like MV1. Both Optimus bots, great for general use. You can use them in all different game modes, and he's just very, very strong and solid. So that brings us to Cyclonus. So Cyclonus is an interesting one. He's definitely a bit underused. Some people will gravitate towards other tacticians, but he has a few abilities in his kit that I think are very helpful to players who are trying to get better, right? So he has a nice combination of offense and defense. He has these resistance buffs that he gets that give him a bit of tankiness when he starts getting hit. He can get melee and range bonuses when he is landing hits. He also has the ability to nullify buffs consistently, which can be a lot more helpful than you might think. He's got pretty solid specials. He's not the biggest damage bot, but his special 1 is armor piercing. His special 2, the last hit of it, is unblockable. His special 3 is pretty solid. And the thing about Cyclonus is that he's the only bot in the game that has a built-in nullification of unstoppable. It's like an anti-unstoppable ability, which is really useful against bots like Motormaster, Demotron, Tantrum, and of course any unstoppable mods, which you often see, things like Exofilter and oftentimes mods and time slides. And so if you're struggling against unstoppable bots or mods, which a lot of people do, especially early on, Cyclonus is great because when the opponent dashes at you when they're unstoppable, they will become stunned, and then it gives you an opening and you can land attacks. It just makes those fights so much easier. And so if you take that combined with his nullification, his unblockable special, his just overall abilities combined with his SIG, and you've got a very useful bot for a lot of different situations. Now, it is nice to have him awakened for sure, but again, his SIG does not really need to be high in order for it to be very beneficial because it is passive damage, right? So when you have him awakened, attacks that result in dark burns that he gets from the dark field and dark energy become stronger, and even at low SIG, it's a nice little boost. And of course, he's getting that dark energy charged up and landing those dark burns whenever he gains a bar of power. So it's easy, it's passive, and his SIG results in additional passive damage that you can land over and over again. So for all of those reasons, I'm a big fan of Cyclo. He's an excellent bot. He's got a few unique abilities, and less experienced players would absolutely benefit from using him. So that brings us to the demos. We're going to start with Megatronus. This one's obvious. He is the best bot in the game, widely used by everybody. I will say, I have said this before, he is not a bot that you want to overly rely on, right? Because he's so good, he's so OP. If you just start using him for everything, you're not going to improve as much as you might like. With that said, his kit is so comprehensive. It is fantastic for not only experienced players, but for newer players as well, right? So he has these fantastic relics. Relic of Fury significantly increases his attack. Relic of Preservation gives him major damage resistance. Immortality makes him invincible near the end of the fight. He's got armor break. He can stun. He's got a fantastic heavy. He's got dark burn. And of course, he can heal. And he can heal very consistently. It takes a little bit of getting used to in terms of timing your specials and using the right specials when the Relic of Preservation is active. But he can heal over and over again in fights. And the healing goes up with rank, and so that's one of the reasons he is one of the most widely used bots in the game. He's got a smooth play style, he's not very complicated, and he has passive power gain. It is slow, but it's passive, it's consistent. He's going to generate power at the same rate no matter what, so you don't have to worry about that. So there's just a lot of things in his kit that are very useful for players that are starting out and trying to improve. And Tronus does not need to be awakened, okay? The Relic of Obedience is amazing. If you're a very experienced player and high-level content, you definitely want it. But it isn't necessary, okay? Because of the fact that it isn't tied to any of the abilities in his kit. He already does so many other things very, very well that even if he's not awakened, he's going to do just as well, if not better, than pretty much anybody else in the game. With that said, once you do have him awakened, he also does not need to be at high SIG for it to be effective, because even though at low SIG, the Relic of Obedience will have a low chance to activate, you have to remember with Tronus, he has a chance to activate it every time it gains a bar of power. So even at low sig, it will activate with some regularity, and it is great because it prevents the opponent from landing buffs and debuffs for 7 seconds. So, like I said, don't overuse him. I recommend using him for the most difficult fights, but he is absolutely a bot that you want. Get him as a 4-star. When you can, get him as a 5-star. Use him selectively, but he will definitely help you out, and he makes almost everything in the game easier. So that brings us to Ironhide. So Demo Ironhide is awesome. He's fun. He's smooth, and he's got a lot of nice things going for him that are helpful for less experienced players, right? He's got lots and lots of burns. He's got an extremely reliable heavy. He's going to be landing lots of burns, can do big damage with it. All of his specials are good. His special 1, you're going to get those burns. You have a high chance to stun. His special 2 is one of the most satisfying in the game. You have these big hits that are always going to crit. And his special 3 can be a real monster special as well. And on top of that, even though you do want him awakened, you don't have to worry about investing in his sig, because his sig, I will tear you apart, even at low sig, is going to give you a pretty large boost in crit damage. At sig 5, sig 10, he's getting 200+% additional crit damage. Obviously, with the sig, you cannot control which special it will activate it on, and it only activates once per fight, but it is helpful. And of course, in some circumstances, he can do some of the biggest damage in the game when his sig activates. So Ironhide, like I said, just very consistent DOT, lots and lots of crits, very, very useful specials. He's got stuns, he's got lots of burns, and a useful sig. So easy to use, very fun to play with, and very beneficial for newer players. So that brings us to the techs. We're going to start with Wheeljack. So Wheeljack, one of the most widely used bots in the game for people of all skill levels, but certainly one of the best bots for newer players because he has a lot of protection built into his kit. So in terms of offense, he's not the hardest hitter, that is for sure, but he has really good and useful debuffs, right? So he can stun, he can shock, and he can power leak on all of his specials, and of course the chance of those things happening increases with his upgrades. So he's got his power and his offensive and his defensive upgrades that are very easy to get. You get them with a heavy, and even if you lose them, you can get them back. And even though they are RNG based, they're just really, really easy to get, and they will increase the chance that you land those shocks and power leaks and stuns with the specials. And sometimes you get lucky and you land all 3 of them. It makes him very fun to play with. He's definitely not complicated. He's got very reliable specials. His special 1 is solid. His special 2 is actually quite good. And it's difficult for the AI to dodge it sometimes because it kind of comes out of nowhere. And then, of course, his special 3 is not very powerful, but it is what allows him to heal consistently. So he can land, between 10 and 20% healing with the special 3. Very useful in harder fights, in longer fights. And of course, he has his shield, right? So he needs to be awakened to have his force shield. But again, he does not need to be high sig in order for it to help you out. Because the thing about Wheeljack's shield is that it does not scale. Meaning, if he's at sig 5 or 10, he's going to be getting, 2 to 3 seconds worth of force shield time at 75, 50, and 25% health. But even at sig 100, it's only 8 seconds. So it increases very, very slowly. And the nice thing is that even at low sig, if you're at, let's say, 90% health and you end up eating a big special that would take out, 50% of your health or more, as long as there's no DOT attached to it, because remember, DOT can penetrate his shield, you won't die. You'll just go down to 75, and that's it, because the shield will save you. Now, of course, if you want to maximize the value of his shield, you want to use nano repair, because that's what really makes it last quite a long time. But if you're a newer player, you don't have to worry about that. That is largely used by experienced players doing things like very high level AMs, LOC2, LOC3, things like that. But whether you have nano repair or not, his shield will absolutely save you when you take hits, because it does activate 3 times per fight. So even if he's at low sig and it's brief, it will absolutely help you out. So Wheeljack, fantastic bot for newer players, certainly if you're still getting hit a fair amount, because he has a lot of protection, he has a lot of healing, a lot of debuffs, and he's fun and easy to play with. So that brings us to Ratchet. So Ratchet is definitely a specialist in the sense that he has some of the best healing in the game. He is not an offensive bot. This is why some people say he's bad, but he's not bad. He's just a bit different. Okay, offensively, he's not going to hit extremely hard, but he has some really nice things going for him. So first of all, he can apply shocks and stuns very frequently. You know, you land those shocks with those ranged hits, which is not difficult to get the hang of. And the more shocks you land on the opponent, the higher chance of stuns you're going to have. And stuns are always helpful. He also has a pretty good chance to stun with his special 1. And even though his special 1 and 2 are not big damage specials, his special 3 is actually a pretty good one. It can do quite a bit of damage. And then, of course, he has his healing, which is amazing. So he can heal with his special 2, which will repair him and give him increased power. He will also heal when he transforms. So when he does a heavy below 50% health, he will automatically generate some health and power. And, of course, he heals with his Sig. Now, you want him awakened, but again, he does not need to be at high Sig in order for emergency repair to help you out because, first of all, he has several other ways to heal. But the thing is that even at low Sig, even though emergency repair will not activate all the time, the nice thing is that he has a chance to activate every time you take a big hit. And so you combine all of his healing methods together, and he has amazing healing potential. And it's pretty remarkable. I mean, he can get down to low health and then end up back at very high health by the end of the fight. So it's just super useful for players who are still getting hit a fair amount, who are still learning the ropes. And of course, like I said, he has that phenomenal synergy with OGP. And so that's one of the best synergies in the game in general, but certainly for newer players, that synergy I would highly recommend because both of those bots are then able to heal. And Ratchet is also, as I said, he's not complicated, he's not difficult to use. So in terms of defense, he's got some of the best in the game, and he is actually still relatively fun to play with, even though he's not the hardest hitter. So that brings us to Shockwave. So Shockwave is a bit different. He takes a little bit of practice. He's more of a ranged-based fighter. Some people like that, some people don't. But regardless, he's on this list because he has some really nice things going for him. So first of all, even though you have to get used to it, he will not take damage on basic range shots when he doesn't have energy charges. So you just block those shots, you don't take damage, and you get those energy charges, which are very important for him. He's got a very reliable heavy. He's got an excellent special 1 because it relates to, more than anything, his power control, right? So you land those shocks. He obviously has a lot of shock. You use up those energy charges and you will drain power from the opponent. You can do it pretty consistently. His special 2 is a big special, not always easy for the AI to dodge, and he can inflict repair block, which is great against a lot of bots and mods. And his special 3 is a monster special, does a ton of damage, and it also inflicts repair block. On top of that, Shockwave has a Sig, which allows him to heal. Now, again, he has to be awakened, but you don't need it to be at high Sig, because kind of like Wheeljack, it does not scale significantly. So the undo chance is relatively low at low Sig, but it doesn't get all that much higher at high Sig, and more importantly, it kind of works in a similar way to Megatronus. And so, in other words, Shockwave has a chance to activate undo, it is RNG based, every time he gains a bar of power. The great thing about it, though, is that even at low Sig, because he has a chance every time he gains a bar of power, it will activate at least somewhat consistently. And the great thing is, it can result in incredible healing, because it will heal all of the damage taken over the previous 4 seconds. So if you have just eaten a special and lost 50% of your health, he can recover all of that. Now, obviously that won't happen all the time, but it can. And so you add all of those things up. He's got very good power control, lots of shocks, very useful specials, repair block. He won't take damage on, blocking those basic range shots. And of course he heals. That makes him very effective, especially if you're looking for a ranged-based fighter. Okay? So finally, that brings us to the scouts. So first up, of course, is Prowl, one of the most widely used bots in the game for people of all skill levels. This is because, of course, he is very easy to use. He has a simple play style. He's fun, and his power control is amazing, right? So it's a very rhythmical pattern with him. I find that Prowl is very easy to build up long hit streaks with. because you start out the fight, you dash back, you charge up those melee buffs, and of course his melee damage rises significantly with those buffs, and then when you attack, you're doing a ton of damage. And then of course he has this phenomenal special 1, which will drain up to 40% of the opponent's power. It's useful against so many different types of bots, so many game modes, all different kinds of mods. He's just so effective in the power control department. On top of that, he has a very strong special 2, does a lot of damage, and he also inflicts a very long, I believe, 16-second power lock on his special 3. So he's just got so much power control. He's easy to use, and even though his SIG is important, again, he does not need to be at high SIG. And in fact, you don't really want him to be at too high of a SIG because he generates power instantly when those melee buffs expire. So even at low SIG, he's going to be getting a nice burst of power every time those melee buffs charge up and then expire. And so that gets you to a special 1 faster, and you can use that special 1 over and over again. On top of that, when he is charging his buffs, he does have some built-in evasion. He can evade attacks, and he has a stun chance with his range shots. So the stun chance is not indicated in his kit, but when he is charging his buffs, it does seem to be higher, and obviously applying stuns is always helpful as well. So Prowl, easy to use, fun to use, tons and tons of power control, very easy to apply melee buffs, and that's why he's one of the most widely used bots for people of all different abilities and skill levels. So that brings us to Windblade. So Windblade, she is one of the biggest raw damage and DOT bots in the game. In other words, she can melt opponents super, super fast. She crits constantly. She bleeds a lot. She shocks a lot. She has power failure. She has armor bypass. She just has so much offense in her that it makes her very fun to play with. She's not a complicated bot. And like I said, she can finish fights faster than so many other bots. Now, some people would say that Windblade is fragile, and she is, but that's true for all of the scouts. The scouts are not tanky. They tend to have low health. So I wouldn't recommend that you dive all in with Windblade in your first 2 weeks of playing. But once you're an okay player even, Windblade just makes so much, or so many of these fights just easier because she's got these great specials. She lands these huge shocks. She lands bleeds very consistently on melee crits. Her special 2 is phenomenal, and you can use it against tanky bots. And even her special 3, which is not very powerful, has more hits than any other special in the game, and it can stun. And she can also stun when she lands several stacks of bleed. So in terms of just raw offense, she has so much of it. She doesn't even need some of her great synergies like Swordmasters to do it. And she also does not need her SIG. Her SIG is nice. It gives her an increased crit rate as the fight goes on, but she already crits so much, you don't have to worry about her SIG, and then once you do have her awakened, you don't have to worry about getting it, to a very high level. Windblade is just a super offensive bot, but also she does have one great piece of defense, which is the fact that she is invulnerable to ranged hits when she uses her heavy. When she goes into that jet form, all ranged hits will just blow right by her, and that is super helpful, especially against certain ranged specials like a Blaster Special 2 or a Mixmaster Special 2. So she has all this offense, and then she has that really great defensive ability with her heavy. That makes her a very useful bot for players that have maybe a little bit of ability, but they're still building up their skill level just because of how strong and powerful she is. So finally, that brings us to Kickback. So Kickback is certainly an ignored bot. A lot of people come to him late. You could argue that other scouts like Cheetor, for example, belong on this list, but I choose Kickback because he is some of the best and most comprehensive utility in the game. He can do so many different things. His base damage is not going to be as high as some of the other scouts, but he more than makes up for it with his utility, okay? First of all, he has excellent power control. It's not as fast as somebody like Prowl's, but he lands those power leaks constantly with his crits, and he crits a lot. So he can land those power leaks with all kinds of hits, with his specials, with everything. And you're going to be draining a small amount of power, but you can drain that power over and over and over again. And once you get the hang of him, you're going to be doing tons of power control on the opponent. He lands very good shocks. He lands very good bleeds with his special 2. He also can heal with his special 3. And by the way, his specials, all of them are excellent, right? So he has this very nice shock on his special 1. He's got bleeds on his special 2. He's got healing on his special 3. He can power leak on all of these specials when he crits. And with the special 3, if you want the healing will increase depending on how many power leaks are on the opponent. Now, obviously, you cannot control that, but generally speaking, you're going to be getting between 10 and 15% healing on average with this special 3. Super helpful in longer and more difficult fights. On top of that, he does not need to be awakened. Okay, so his T-Clog ability is nice. It helps you out. But if he's not awakened, it doesn't matter because it's not tied to his power control or his DOT or his other utility. And once you do have him awakened, the nice thing is that at low sig, he will still activate T-Clog relatively frequently. You use the heavy. If you inflict T-Clog, the opponent's power rate goes down, and they will become stunned if they use a heavy. So it's a nice thing to have. And I should also mention he can purify. He can purify shock, and he also can consume power rate buffs, power rate debuffs, things like that. So he has so much power control built into his kit in a different way than a bot like Prowl. He has good DOT, even if it's not quite as strong as some of the other bots. He can heal, and his general utility just makes him super useful for newer players. He takes a little bit of practice, but he will absolutely reward you if you spend some time with him. So that wraps up this edition of the anti-tier list. So hopefully, these 15 bots or so will serve you well if you decide to use them. Like I said, there are other bots that we could put on this list, but I think these bots will provide the greatest benefit to most people if they're looking to improve their skill, or if they're new, or if they're just coming back from a break and they, need to build up their skill again before they reach the highest level content. Because the nice thing is a lot of these bots are also very widely used in things like high-level AMs or LOC missions. And so even if you use these bots when you're first starting out, you'll often continue to use them for a very long time to come. So I hope this has been helpful. Let me know if you have any questions, and we will speak again soon.